All right, we ready to go, Holly?
Yeah, I think we're ready to do it.
Okay, so you can hear me great. Well, thank you all, and thank STLX for hosting us this evening, and thank you all for coming. I'm Carol Righi, and Jeremy Chu is right beside me or below me, depending on your perspective. We're going to be talking about conversational UX design this evening, and I want you all to start imagining it's 1994. Some of you probably were kind of little, but I'm sure you know the reference here, 1994. And I want you to imagine there was a bunch of coworkers hanging out in South Florida, and they were at a weekend fun run, and they were just hanging out. And before they ran, and as they're running, they're very excited, and they start chatting about what they did at work the day before. One of them says, I actually went to the Louvre yesterday, the Louvre Museum, all the ways in Paris. And this other person says, you know, maybe they'll put an encyclopedia on there. And then this other person is, well, maybe one day I won't have to go to the library to get some of the books I need. And another will say, wow, maybe, you know, can I put my scanned photos up there to see, you know, show my family? And, you know, what were they talking about? And who were these people? The reason I picked that very specific reference of South Florida and that year is because one of those people was me. We were part of the usability department at IBM in Boca Raton, Florida. And the day before was the first time we all touched something called Mosaic. And Mosaic, if you don't recall, was one of the first or the first commercial web browser. And it was our first experience using the World Wide Web. It was mind-blowing. We had no idea how our lives were about to change. We were all working in personal computing, in desktop software, operating systems. And we experienced this thing called the web, and we were like, well, that's, you know, somebody will pay attention to it. That's a niche thing. We don't have to know about it. Well, the reason I bring up 1994 is because that's kind of where we are right now in the space of conversational UX design. This is Jeremy and I again, and we're going to be talking this evening about this new field, relatively new field of conversational UX design. So we're going to introduce some of the basics. In the breakout sessions, that'll spin off in a little bit. We're going to have you all try your hand at this. We'll give you some concepts and put them to use. And then we'll come back together, do some debriefing. We're also going to talk about how similar some of these concepts, tools, and methods are to what we do today. And it's really kind of a call to action to this community, because I think we're really well positioned to take this new field and be at the forefront, and we'll see why as we go. And then part of this conversation, we're going to talk about actually putting this together in a process, and end to end, how do you do conversational UX design from discovery to delivery? So that's our agenda for the next little bit. Let's start with a definition of what conversational UX design is. It's a user experience methodology. It's exciting wording here, but user experience methodology that incorporates a design language based on human conversation, right? And it leverages voice, chat, and other speech recognition and natural language-based technologies to mimic real human conversations. There's a few books I put on this page. These are references for you, but they're up there to show you, you know, in 1994, there weren't a lot of books about how to design for the web. We're just scratching the surface now in conversational UX design, but there are some new books coming out all the time. And we're starting to explore them and learn more about the space. Where did this field come from, and what's part of this field? Well, we've kind of come a long way from Clippy, if anybody remembers obnoxious little Clippy from the Microsoft days. And Clippy used to sit down in the corner of your Microsoft Word session and ask you if you wanted its help to write a letter. Things like chatbots that you see on the right, another aspect of conversational UX design, really in the early days. And down below, you know, those jail systems you get into, please press 1 if you want this and press 2 if you want that. And it goes on, and it shuffles you through a menu system. And that got a little bit better with speech recognition, so you didn't have to press 1, you could say 1. But today, there's a lot more advantages to using these virtual agents, as we call them, these more advanced chatbots, because they're leveraging artificial intelligence to make that conversation much more natural. And let's just take a minute for some examples of these virtual agents.
I found an account linked to your phone number. Am I speaking with Judy Klein? Yeah. Hi, Judy. I see you have an upcoming service appointment on Tuesday, December 10th. Is that what you're calling about? Yeah. Please say the insurance policy number associated with the loss.
057-2860. C as in Charlie, 3023B as in Bravo.
Was that 057-2860C3023B?
Yes.
Your account has been verified. How can I help you today?
I need to find out if I can stop the automatic withdrawal from my account on the 1st of March.
Did you want to cancel auto pay on your membership?
Yes.
Hello, this is the eye specialist. Am I speaking with Jerry Delcy?
Yes.
I see you missed your recent eye exam. Would you like to reschedule?
Yes.
When would you like your new appointment to be?
November 30th at 5:40 p.m.
The closest I have is Friday, November 30th at 4 p.m. Is that okay?
No, can we do Monday at 5:40 p.m.?
Monday, December 2nd at 5:40 p.m. is available. Would you like to confirm your appointment for this time?
Yes.
Please tell me your home address, including house number and street name.
6 Belton Street.
To confirm, your address is 6 Belton Street, Morristown, New Jersey, correct?
Yep.
I have a link with tracking information for your order and can send it to you via text message. Standard data rates apply. May I have your permission to send a text message to 813-774-0109?
Yes.
So the difference between Clippy and those clips that you just saw are tremendous. A lot of it is because of the introduction of artificial intelligence to get those agents to be more human and have more human conversations. They understand things better. They're able to communicate better. The user's experience is a lot better consequently. So that whole history from those 1960s level, what we call DTMF systems, when you press the tone, right? And press 1 for this, press 2 for that. Those started in the 60s. Clippy and other bots also started in the 1960s. So this has been around for a long time. But once we get into things like Siri and Alexa and Google Assistant, you're bringing in more of the artificial intelligence, the use of microphone arrays to capture conversations and so forth. So even though the field is new, relatively speaking, as we're experiencing it, it's come a long way, and it's been around really in some form since the 1960s. And then finally, technologies like Amazon Connect through Amazon Web Services enable companies to really rapidly deploy these systems. So creating and building one of these is not as daunting as it used to be. There are a lot of benefits to these systems. Some are obvious, some not so obvious. First of all, if it's well executed, it's just so much more natural than even the best GUI. I mean, we've gotten used to typing and interacting with screens, but if you think about it, we have even much more experience just communicating with conversations, with language. So it's much more natural right out of the box, so to speak. if it's well executed, it can also save a business a great deal of money. So they don't have to have humans at the other end of the phone to serve their customers. So, you know, and at the same time, customer service employees at companies will have a more satisfying job because they can solve bigger problems for customers than can be solved by agents who could just kind of do these things automatically and never have to get to talk to a real person. Voice user interfaces are inherently more accessible for many users with disabilities. So users with visual impairment, obviously having a voice interface, much more accessible. Users with motor impairment as well. And like most accessible designs, virtual voice user interfaces help everyone. So I always have this photo of a curb cutout. If you're all familiar with this enhancement to streets, it was originally created to help disabled folks get on and off of the street with wheelchairs, but then became, of course, helpful to others who were on wheels. So somebody moving a stroller or skating or skateboarding or cycling were able to benefit from something that was originally created for folks with disabilities. So VUIs can be helpful not just to folks with disabilities and everyday use, but people driving. It's much more safe to drive while you're talking to some virtual agent than actually trying to type and text. And people who are multitasking, just working around the house. You could scream across the room and ask Alexa to turn off the lights while you're folding laundry or doing anything like that. So there's a lot of advantages for everyone in the space of voice user interfaces. I'm going to turn over to Jeremy now to talk a little bit about human conversation, design concepts, and components.
Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy. Thanks for coming tonight. So yeah, as Carol kind of said, I'm going to go over some human conversation concepts, or design concepts, and some components. So the goal tonight is really just to kind of give you a taste of conversational UX design, right? You know, Carol defined kind of what it is, define some of kind of the outputs of what conversational UX design does in kind of Siri and Alexa and some of the benefits. But we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty a little bit. And with that being said, it's only natural to start with some Seinfeld. So we got a little video here for you guys.
Hello, and welcome to Movie Phone. If you know the name of the movie you'd like to see, press 1. Come on. Using your touch-tone keypad, please enter the first 3 letters of the movie title now. You've selected Agent Zero. If that's correct, press correct. Why don't you just tell me the name of the movie you selected?
All right, so, you know, we're sitting here and we just watched that and we're kind of thinking, like, what the hell was that, right? So we've all been there before, if we think back, you know, whether you've, you know, called into some sort of contact center and you've, you know, had a conversation with either a live agent or some sort of virtual agent, the conversation a lot of times is filled with confusion, ambiguity, and things like that. So this is kind of where conversational UX design enters the fray. So where does conversational UX design start? And quite simply, as designers, conversational UX design always starts with human conversation. So there's this kind of saying that, you know, as a designer, you always design for the conversation first. And really, if we really want to kind of implement engaging virtual agents, a designer really must first understand how to both understand and design engaging conversations. So with that being said, there are some rules of natural human conversation that we'll want to go over. And the conversation aspect of conversational design is really kind of the foundation of what we do. For example, it'll allow us to design across different modalities, like if we're designing a text application or a voice application, or if we're designing across different channels. So like if we're designing a virtual agent for use on a phone versus a desktop, you know, with a mobile phone or a smart speaker, things like that. And starting with the conversation really provides that consistency and flexibility to accommodate all of these different types of UIs, and really provides the framework when we get to the point where we're actually programming this stuff. So with that being said, in human conversation, we're going to go over two topics. That's the cooperative principle and turn taking. And then next slide, please. So we have this quote here, right? It says, we don't have to think about conversation just as fish don't have to think about water. And that's a quote from Peter Hodgson, who is a Google Assistant designer. And what that really means is that, you know, a lot of the time conversation to us seems very easy, but that's fortunately really because it's innate to us. It's very instinctual. You know, as we're born as babies, we babble, and those babbles become words. Those words become sentences, and those sentences become full-fledged conversations. But if we kind of really think about things and break down conversation for really what it is and the interaction that it is, we'll find that it's both it's inherently very contextual and very social. And with that comes a lot of subtle verbal and nonverbal nuances and cues. So in conversation, we have, you know, physical cues that can tell us a little bit about the conversation, or emotional cues. So, and these, you know, these complex, subtle cues, they really make conversation a complex thing to kind of quantify and codify. So it's really important as conversational designers that we are identifying these interactions between users and, you know, maybe the virtual agent that we're designing, and really base them on how humans are actually communicating in real life. So really, kind of simple terms, in terms of conversational UX design, our end goal is to train the system to converse and interact like a human and not the other way around. So next slide. So one of those two topics that we talked about, or we mentioned before, is the cooperative principle. And simply put, the cooperative principle is really kind of this unspoken rule that we all have in human conversation, that we kind of all agree to be helpful to one another so that we can progress the conversation to some sort of suitable ending. You know, we want to be informative with one another. We want to be truthful to one another. We want to be relevant, and we want to be as clear as possible. So within the cooperative principle itself, those things are described by, you know, 4 different rules or 4 different maxims. And again, those are quantity, quality, relation, and manner. So quantity really speaks to being informative within a conversation. So we want to make our contributions to that conversation as informative as possible, but we don't want to like talk way too much to where it becomes like this conversational run-on sentence, right? So we want to be informative, but not, you know, talk way too much. So from a UX standpoint, if you kind of think of Miller's Law, there's really only so much, you know, a user can take in and recall in certain designs. It's kind of similar to that. Secondly, there is the maxim of quality, in which we as humans in conversation, you know, subconsciously agree to be truthful to one another. We don't want to give information that is false or that's not supported by evidence. So if we are not truthful, then we start introducing a lot of ambiguity and confusion in conversation. Third is relation, and that simply put is to be relevant. So we're talking about conversational UX design and virtual agents tonight. So it's probably not super relevant that I mention, you know, what I ate for lunch earlier this afternoon. And then last, there's the maxim of manner. And this just states that we should be clear in conversation. We should be clear, brief, and as orderly as possible to kind of progress the conversation to some sort of suitable ending. Next slide. Another topic within human conversation is turn taking. So if we kind of think of the cooperative principle as the content of human conversation, we can think of turn taking as sort of the engine or the mechanism in which we have those conversations or we use that content. And turn taking is essentially how individuals within conversation resolve ambiguity or repair conversations so that we can all understand one another. And it's important to understand how humans naturally manage turn taking so that designers can build virtual agents or virtual user interfaces to basically do the same thing in a very natural way. So yeah, so turn taking is simply put is like when you're in a conversation, it's taking turns. I'll say something and maybe Carol will say something next and we'll have a conversation in that manner. Within turn taking though, there are two topics to kind of consider and be aware of as we are kind of researching and designing conversation and virtual agents, and that's patterns and sequences. So if we go to the next slide. So in a broad sense, patterns are the repeatable ways in which individuals take turns. So for example, in conversation, if we're talking about an example with a virtual agent, a user may say something followed up by the agent. Conversely, we may have a conversation that is led by the agent and followed up by the user. And what we might find as we're researching human conversation in the context of what we're trying to do, we may find more complex scenarios where, in conversation, a user may say something followed by an agent, and there may be some sort of audible pause, and the agent may follow up on something. So again, in a very broad sense, patterns are just, the repeatable ways that we take turns in conversation. And these are really important because we want to understand how conversations work so we can build technologies like virtual agents that can mimic these in a very natural way. And also they help us make design decisions. So for example, like in some UX scenarios, we want to guide the user in the path in which they could take, as users may not always know what they want out of something. So if we think about that example, we can say potentially a user-led conversation is naturally reactionary, right? But if we flip it and start with an agent-led conversation, we can guide the user through their path and help them as much as possible. So second, within patterns is the topic of sequences. And sequences are essentially the order of turns within the context of conversation. So the best way to explain these is by using examples. Within sequences, there are things called pairs. And what that looks like is the example on top where an agent may say, "What is your name?" And the user may respond by saying, "Joe Schmo." So that in and of itself is just a pair. It accomplishes the task at hand. But we can also have expansions of those pairs. So in the same type of example, an agent may say, "What is your name?" The user may follow that up if they didn't understand, say, "What was that?" And an agent may follow up again and say, "What was your name?" And the user says, "Oh, it's Joe Schmo." So that is still accomplishes the same task at hand, but it's an expansion of that task. And then lastly, there are telling sequences. Telling sequences don't necessarily select someone to speak next. So an example of that would just be simply put, someone may say the sky is blue, and the other individual may say cool. And that's the end of that. So those are kind of two broad principles or concepts within human conversations itself. But kind of what happens if these things fail? So we're gonna follow that up with another video.
Hey, Murph. Hey, Ronathan. I heard you're having trouble with your computer.
Yeah, thanks for coming down.
Okay, so what seems to be the problem?
So every time I try to get online, it's asking me for an admin password,
Sure.
but it shouldn't need a password to get onto the internet.
Sure.
And I should already have admin privileges on this computer.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Did you get all that?
Yeah, totally. So you need admin privileges?
No.
Yeah.
I already have admin privileges.
Okay.
I just need to
Great.
get on the internet.
Okay,
and I shouldn't need admin privileges.
Yeah, got it.
I feel like you're not actually listening to me.
Yeah, sure.
Are you actually not listening to me,
no,
or are you saying that you get that it seems that
totally.
way?
That makes sense.
Okay, you need to stop that.
Okay, doing what?
You need to stop checking in with me so much saying You need to stop saying yeah.
What do you mean?
It seems like you're not listening and that you're just focusing on saying
no, that
got
makes
it
sense.
and everything. Like you took some kind of active listening class, but you're not actually paying attention.
Totally. Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Then why did you just agree with me a million times while I said it?
Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm just showing you that I'm listening to you. So you have a problem with your dog, is what I'm hearing?
No, you're clearly not listening to me. Just shut up. Shut up.
Okay.
Shut up.
Sure.
Shut up.
Sure.
Shut up.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Okay.
Shut up.
Okay, sure.
Shut up!
Okay.
Don't talk. Don't talk for a second.
Sure.
Got you.
Totally.
Okay. If you're actually listening to me, why don't you tell me what I just said?
Sure. You said that when you try to get online, it keeps asking you for an admin password, which doesn't make any sense because you don't need that to get online, and you should be listed as an admin on this computer anyway. You asked if I was listening. I verified that you had admin privileges. Then you spend the next 2 minutes scrutinizing the way that I listened to you and my concern for your pets. Then you asked me to recap the conversation, which is where we are right now.
So you're gonna fix my computer?
Sure, totally.
Fuck you, Ronathan.
Sorry for the
All right. So another crazy moment, right? So if we kind of replay that video in our head, what did we see? We saw complete confusion. We saw a lot of ambiguity. There was not clear turn taking, but strangely in the end, Ronathan was able to recall everything that was said and what was needed. So just like a lot of things, we can come to the same conclusions in a lot of different ways. But as conversational designers, we do not want the conclusion to come about in that way. So now what, right? This is where conversational UX design helps in those situations. So we're gonna go over some of the elements of conversational UX design. So some of the principles and components like conversational markers and confirmations. We'll go over a little bit about some of human-centered concepts like context and empathy. And then Carol's gonna go over a little bit about some design artifacts and design documentation.
And also I wanna mention, you'll get a copy of these relevant slides for the exercise in time to do the exercise. So you don't have to take notes or anything. We'd like you to use some of these concepts during the exercise. So you'll have access to some of these slides. And then later on as well, you'll have access to the whole slide deck.
Cool. All right, so as conversational designers, when we are designing a conversation and building virtual agents or voice user interfaces, we want to design to give the user feedback, right? So this is just a simple way to start a simple topic, but we give feedback by the use of conversational markers. And these conversational markers are very subtle cues that provide simple, but yet effective feedback to give individuals context as to where they are within the conversation or the state of it. And quite frankly, they add a little bit more of an engaging and personal experience. So some example of conversational markers are things like timelines. So the use of the words like first, second, or third. Acknowledgements. So words like thanks, got it, or sorry. And the use of positive feedback. So using words or phrases like good job or happy to hear that. So these are just very simple things that you can leverage in conversational design to spruce it up a little bit. The next up is, as conversational designers, we want to design so users feel understood. So if we play back that college humor video we just saw, obviously the person who was trying to reset their password did not feel like they were being understood. So In order to do so, conversational designers leverage something called confirmations. And these are just interactions that provide feedback and ensures a collective understanding of certain things. And confirmations are kind of, in a large part, are split up into two different types, both explicit confirmations and implicit confirmations. Explicit confirmations like force a user to confirm information by asking a question or requiring some sort of response. And they add a lot of clarity to the conversation, but also from a design perspective, it can add another step within the conversation. Implicit confirmations, on the other hand, let the user know what was understood without asking them. So it's a very subtle, simple cue, and it simplifies the experience, but at the risk of causing confusion or errors. So the next slide, we have a couple examples of what explicit and implicit confirmations look like. So in a scenario in which an individual is calling an IT virtual agent to reset a password, an explicit confirmation may look something like this, where the agent says, "How can I help you?" And a user says, "I need to reset my password." And the agent may follow up saying, "You said you need to reset your password. Is that correct?" And a user could respond yes or no. So the agent asking that question is a form of, explicitly asking for confirmation of what the user said. On the other hand, implicitly, if we look at the implicit confirmation example, the agent would say, "How can I help you?" And the user again would say, "I need to reset my password." But in this instance, an agent could say, "Okay, I am resetting your password." So stating that they are resetting their password implies an understanding that, the user needed to reset their password to begin with.
And just a quick note, as we go, I want you to kind of think about the parallels to what we normally do when we're doing GUI design, screen design, or any other interaction design. Something like a confirmation pop-up would be the equivalent to an explicit confirmation, the old "Are you sure?" hit OK, as opposed to just going to the action. So one of the points we hope you come away with is that you already have a lot of the knowledge that you need to do this CUXD, this conversational UX design. It's just a matter of translating what we already know into this brave new world. And we'll come back to that concept again a little bit later on.
All right, so when designing and building virtual agents or voice user interfaces, things are bound to go wrong. As Carol kind of mentioned in the beginning, there are a plethora of new technologies that are driving these builds. So artificial intelligence, speech recognition, natural language understanding, and there's always room for errors here. And these errors can oftentimes be, the simple fact for a poor experience and the most memorable traits in these interactions. So if we go to the next slide, there are a few different types of errors that you, as a designer, you would want to know about and be able to design against. So again, in the scenario in which a customer is calling to reset a password, there could be the error where no speech is detected. So this is a situation where the virtual agent may not hear anything or may not hear any type of input, and we need a plan for this. So in this use case, we would attempt to repair the conversation. So if an agent says, "How can I help you?" and there's radio silence, simply we would want to say something like, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. How can I help you?" And then if there's still silence, we can escalate it by saying something like, "I still didn't hear you. How can I help you?" Similarly, there's speech detected, but nothing reliable was understood. So this is a situation in which the virtual agent, the technology running it, heard something, but didn't reliably understand what it heard. So in this use case, if a user were to say, "I need to reset my password," a virtual agent may say something very simple like, "I'm sorry, I didn't get that. How can I help you?" And if we needed to escalate that, we could use verbiage like the word still and say, I still didn't get that. How can I help you? So there's just a very subtle nuance in how we would handle those types of errors. Next slide. The next two examples of errors are a little bit more difficult to handle. So the first example is something was recognized correctly, but mishandled by the system. So an example of this would be if the user said, I need to reset my password, but the system hasn't really programmed any type of response for reset my password. This is something that in the system of the virtual agent, we would want to monitor the data. And then as a designer, we want to take that insight and iterate upon the conversation so that we can plan for if this were to occur ever again. And similarly, in the case of something recognized incorrectly, we would want to handle that situation the same way. So an example of this would be like if a user said, I would like to be texted some sort of information, but the system heard the word Texas in replacement of the word texted. We want to monitor the system for its data so that we can learn of insights to iterate on the conversational design at a later point. All right, so those are some of the just like basic conversational design components when we're building virtual agents and voice user interfaces. But as Carol kind of mentioned, there's a lot of parallels to just like what we do today in terms of UX. So conversational design is still human-centered design. And we want to go over just some additional topics that are relevant for UX in general and conversational design. Context is one of them. And context just means keeping track of the conversation so that prior content can be used to facilitate later exchanges. So if we think about it, a virtual agent that can't really remember anything prior to its last interaction is not very useful. So to use context, we could do something like providing awareness regarding what the user can do. So for example, we could say something like, how would you like me to send a password reset link? I can email it or text it. So we're giving context that the user could be emailed or texted. Another situation is with context, we want to remember to whom or what the conversation is referring to. So an example of this may look like if a user said something like, can you text me a list of restaurants near St. Louis, Missouri? And an agent responds, sure, I have just texted them to you. The agent should be able to respond in that manner using the word them that refers back to, the restaurants. And if there's some sort of pause and then a user kind of context switches and says, thanks, how's the weather looking there? The virtual agent will need to understand and be prepared for, this complete context switch where the word there is referring to St. Louis. All right, combating ambiguity. So combating ambiguity really means planning for the inherent multiple interpretations in how humans say things. So in order to combat ambiguity, we could do things like leveraging known information. For example, if we're building a virtual agent for some sort of company where there's user accounts, we may know a person may live in Springfield, Missouri. So equally, we know that they don't live in Springfield, Illinois. And if we bring that up, it's irrelevant. We'd also want to, again, leverage previous context within the conversation. So using the Springfield, Missouri or Springfield, Illinois example, the person, in the context of the conversation, the person at one point in time may say they live in Springfield, Missouri. So again, bringing up Springfield, Illinois later in the conversation is irrelevant. And then in order to combat ambiguity, we went over confirmations. These are just a straightforward way that we could ask for information and for assuredness to do away with ambiguity and confusion. And then lastly is just empathy. designing for empathy means that we're designing and understanding the user and designing virtual agents that are both empathetic and personalized to them. And below are just a bunch of bullet points that we want to think about. What's the motivation of our users? What was their mood? Or maybe what industry are we building a virtual agent in? For example, if we're building a virtual agent for a healthcare company, we want to be cognizant that the users that may be using the virtual agent may be dealing with health concerns and things of that nature. So, all right, so with that being said, we went over human conversation. We went over some of the rules and principles. We went over some conversational components and principles. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Carol to kind of go over some design artifacts.
Yeah, just a couple of slides here on design artifacts, meaning, we know what we deliver now as designers, as UX designers. We deliver prototypes, we deliver screens, we deliver style guides and all those kinds of things. What do we deliver if we now want to become a conversational UX designer? Well, the first primary deliverable is a sample dialogue. So think of this as like a prototype or lo-fi prototype. It's a quick sense of the sound and feel of an interaction between the user and the virtual agent. And it's written, if any of you are theater people, it's written kind of just like a movie script, just like some of the examples that Jeremy showed earlier. What does the user say? How does the agent respond? What does the user say? How does the agent respond? And that's the way you capture that again, the sound and the feel of interactions. You start working through the logic. You start anticipating what the user might say, and you try them all out by laying them out in a sample dialogue. You want to convey the experience the user will have without the distraction of the technology. So what does that sound like, right? That's like paper and pencil prototyping. You don't want the technology to get in the way of understanding really the gist of what you're trying to accomplish. It's quick and dirty. It could easily evaluate concepts. Do we want to use implicit confirmations? Do we want to use explicit? Well, let's try them out in a dialogue. Oh, by the way, we could test these too, right? There's testing that we can do. Just the way we test lo-fi prototyping in a usability test, we can test dialogues in what we call a Wizard of Oz test, where the moderator or someone along with the moderator actually plays that virtual agent, and the user gets to experience what it sounds like to have a conversation with a virtual agent, even though it's not a real virtual agent. It's a person pretending to be virtual, which is really backwards. But anyhow, that's where the Wizard of Oz comes from. If you remember in the movie, that scene where there's just this little dude pulling all these levers, making this big monster appear. And he screams out, "Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain." That's what a Wizard of Oz test is. It's not a real monster. It's just somebody pretending to be a virtual agent. Another artifact that comes out of CUXD is what's called the conversational flow. And this is essentially a flow chart. You could think of this as a storyboard. The way we storyboard out screen flows, we're storyboarding conversational flows. So if the agent greets the user, what happens next? If the user says this, it branches off in this direction versus saying this, and it branches off in another direction. Very familiar looking flow chart. Really not a lot of differences between storyboards, except the content is dialogues. It's the verbiage that comes out of the user, the verbiage that comes back from the agent. And in true human-centered design fashion, these are iterative. So they can start really high level with a lot of phony Greek verbiage. And then as you move further down the development cycle, you can get more specific about what the actual verbiage is going to be in these conversations. And then finally, quickly, documenting designs. The same way that we document designs today, we create style guides and pattern libraries for conversations. So it helps to provide the structure of the conversations. So for example, you see down there, 4.2 repair. Jeremy explained how this would work. Let's anticipate there's going to be an error state where you can't match what the user is saying. And so this is how we react and respond when there's no match versus no input. And you set up these styles and these patterns and these basically things to follow, so that as you're creating an entire conversational system, you can be consistent. And developers, as again, the same exact reason we do this today. Why do we create pattern libraries and style guides? So that developers can move more quickly, they don't have to make stuff up as they go. And the end result is a more consistent experience for the end user. So with that, we are going to have you guys design a conversation. We're going to send you off into breakout rooms, and let me give you the overall task first. And then we will have our very adept Holly help us get into groups. So here's the scenario. We're going to pretend a pet owner is calling a large pet store to get flea and tick medications for their pet iguana. And we're going to have you guys design a conversation between a customer and the store's IVR, which is essentially their virtual agent. Okay, so the customer picks up the phone and they're trying to do this over the phone, and then the agent is responding. That's the conversation you guys are going to design. I want you to make an assumption the IVR, the virtual agent, can accept either spoken or typed input. I'll leave it there. You can work with that however you want. The logistics, as we said, you're going to be assigned to breakout rooms. There's going to be a link in that Holly's going to post shortly in the chat window of this meeting. And that link gives you access to some place to record the work that you guys do. It's basically a Google slide deck. As I mentioned earlier, it also contains all of the relevant examples Jeremy gave earlier, so that you can use those as you're creating your conversation. So you'll get a link, you click the link, there'll be a bunch of links to slide decks. Pick the slide deck associated with your group. It'll all make sense when we do it, I promise. If it doesn't, we're going to be sitting right here to walk you through it. You'll have, I think, probably between 20 and 30 minutes. We'll monitor and give everybody a heads up, when a 2-minute warning when you're getting close. Pick somebody in your group to be the scribe and to actually input everybody's contributions into that little slide deck. Create a happy path dialogue. So assume, don't assume the Kramer or the other guy episodes, right? Assume the customer easily progresses through the IVR. And use those concepts we talked about: turn taking, conversational markers, confirmations, empathy, anything that we gave you an overview to. Put that in there, and then we'll debrief later on and talk about how those are used. If you guys are really ambitious and you want to live on the wild side, go back through your conversation and pick one of those user inputs and responses and make it so that the user input's not understood. And try some error handling, right? How do you do some error handling? And you have the examples in the slides. And have some fun with this, because it's, Thursday night. Why not?
Yes. And Carol, I have one question for you when you're ready.
Okay, I am ready.
Okay, so Jeremy wants to know, he says he is curious, is there a way to understand how different AI voices affect the way users experience the conversation?
Yeah, so should we address that now, Jeremy, or should we bring this up later on when we have Q&A? What do y'all think?
I mean, it's up to you. I don't want to force anything. It was just something that popped in my head as you guys were kind of going over the last section. I was like, oh, like you can test these. I wonder if you can kind of gauge how users feel about the conversation based on the AI voice.
So
like if you had Sam Jackson versus Sean Connery, right?
Exactly. Yeah, like or even a male voice to a female voice, like having that understanding.
So there's a whole nother 3-hour conversation we can have about how do you test this stuff, right? Remember, we started off with, this is the 1994 of conversational UX design, right? And in the 1994, when we were first learning about usability, we didn't have a lot of different testing methodologies. We were making stuff up as we went. We were creating things like lo-fi prototype testing, right? That's where we're at now with CUXD. There are different ways you can test lo-fi. I mentioned earlier, Wizard of Oz testing where you're actually pretending, but that's not going to get you the answer to your question. What you do later on down the path is once you have a working system, you can do A/B testing, which we do now, right? We do now for websites and for applications, and you can have 2 different versions, and you can put them out there and collect massive amounts of data from 2 different groups of people and do post-call interviews and post-call surveys to find out what the reaction to the voices are. You can check the accuracy of the interaction, A versus B, depending, and see if it's attributable to the voice. You could talk about how long the call went on, how many error states there were. Did it come to a suitable conclusion? All these different metrics that you can set up an A/B test, and then deploy it, gather your data, make your analysis, and iterate. Jeremy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say, like, those are all great points. And I think, Jeremy, the point that you bring up is important, right? So like in UX, we have things called personas, and we always want to design against those personas and understand who we're designing for. What's a little interesting in conversational UX design is there's also the persona of the agent, right? So we want to understand, like you said, what type of voice works best for our users in the situation and the conversation in which we're designing for. So in the use case of, the healthcare industry, do we want a male? Do we want a female? Do they want them to have an accent? Do they want them to sound soothing? Things like that. It's definitely a very important part of conversational design. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways we can test for that, as Carol mentioned.
Great question, Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer.
Okay, so I posted a link in the chat to the Google Doc that they're going to use. And when you go to your room number and your document or your group number will be the same. So if you're in room 1, you'll do group 1 exercise, group 2 exercise, or room 2, group 2 exercise, and so on.
And yeah, go ahead and pick somebody who, it might be somebody more comfortable with using Google Slides. If it's pretty straightforward, just pretend it's PowerPoint and you won't know the difference. And you'll see a slide that looks like this. And this is where you will record the conversation you're designing as a group. You can add more slides. You could just scroll way down, however you want to manage it. And as I said, we'll take about 20 minutes and check in with you all. And so let's go ahead and get started.
So,
all right, I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll go around the horn and have you guys share what you did. It'll take about 5 minutes apiece, each group. You can all talk at once out loud. We know how well that works, or you can kind of take turns or pick somebody to talk on your behalf. But let me reshare here. And back to presenting. And here is what we're going to debrief. So take us through your conversation and tell us which concepts you employed. How did you handle errors? If you did, what rules did you apply? I really want to hear though, in your experience, what was hard for you about this? What kind of got you hung up, and, you were talking about what to do and where to go and maybe disagreeing. And think again about, we could talk together, or you can give us your ideas about how you might test this. So let's start. I'm going to be very uncreative here. We're going to start with group 1. So who would like to?
I'm going to call on Amanda V.
All righty. I can do that.
Yeah, go ahead. And can you share? Can our participants share? Okay.
Yes, it looks like I have the ability to share. So let me go ahead and do that.
All right, group 1.
All right. So I'm going to start with our happy path. And I'm just going to kind of talk through sort of what we talked about as a group here. So we decided that our user was in a state of emotional distress. And so as soon as they answer, they say, there are fleas and ticks all over my iguana. They're very distressed. And so the virtual agent picked up on the fleas and ticks, said, I heard you say fleas and ticks, do you need medicine? And then, so the user asked, yes, I need medicine. How do I get it? And then the virtual agent was able to interpret that statement. We did have a conversation of, the virtual agent being able to understand that it would be medicine. So referring back to that sentence, and then the virtual agent giving two options, to pick up the medicine or to have it delivered. So the user asked, do you do same day delivery? The virtual agent has been programmed to talk about delivery. So they said, yes, we offer 2-day delivery. If this is urgent, we recommend picking it up at your nearest location. And so the virtual agent was able to provide the nearest location by asking the user for their address and telling them how far away the store was from them, and also determining the way to pay. So that was our happy path. We decided to go with an unhappy path, or a not so happy path as well. And again, our user is very distressed. And this time, the virtual agent didn't quite understand what the user said. They picked up on the word iguana and asked, would you like to buy an iguana? And the very distressed user says, no, I already have an iguana. It has fleas. And in this scenario, fleas was not something that the virtual agent recognized. However, it gave suggestions for common issues with iguanas, such as mites, burns, which is real, according to Amanda Andres, who's done a lot of iguana research in her life, and parasites. And so the user goes, I guess mites, because the user, like myself, doesn't know really what the difference between mites and fleas are. So the virtual agent provides a definition of mites and asks if they would like medicine. And that took us back to our happy path.
Bravo. Nice.
Thank you.
So what was hard about this versus what was easy? What did you guys talk about and try to work through together?
Oh, it was funny. I was telling Jeremy, I was like, okay, how much conversation can we really have about an iguana and some flea medicine? I thought it would be like the agent would say, hi, what can I help you with? And the user would say, I need medicine for my iguana. And the agent would be like, great, here's how you get medicine. But we realized there was a lot more to the interaction than we originally anticipated. And we had to add columns. I'm sorry, we had to add rows here. And we actually wanted to expand this conversation a little bit more, but we didn't have room in the slides. So I don't think we anticipated how much back and forth there could potentially be, and how unpredictable human conversation can be. Because in some senses, human conversation is very predictable, but in other senses, it can be extremely unpredictable. And so I think, and one of the biggest challenges I had was determining, for me, the whole time I'm thinking, okay, what do I think the virtual agent would understand? Like, I don't know what it's been programmed to understand. So Jeremy said, for this exercise, let's focus less on that and more on just creating the interaction. But for me, we use so much ambiguous language as humans. And so I'm like, will the, computer understand if we say something a certain way? And so I think that was the difficult part, was you're not talking to a human, you're talking to a machine. And how can we make sure this machine understands, and how would this machine possibly interpret this phrase or word?
And this is great, by the way. Great job. And the question is, how do we know what a human might say, right? And so how do we know anything in UX design? We do research, right? We do contextual inquiry. We observe. We, in the case of virtual agents, let's say it's customer service for a big pet store, they have call logs, right? And transcripts and all that sort of stuff that can be mined you can dig in and just see what people have said over time, assuming that they're capturing all of that. Or you can do ride-alongs, right? You can go sit at the pet store's customer service, area, and sit there with earphones on, listening to what a customer service, a live rep actually hears when somebody calls. And you're doing research, you're doing your ethnographic research, and you use that as fodder to create these dialogues. So again, we have a lot of the skills we need already.
Definitely.
Great job, you guys. Bravo. Give them a hand.
Thank you.
All right.
Good job, team.
All right, let's go to group 2. Who's the sacrificial? Who volunteers as tribute?
So we didn't talk about who was going to present. I can speak to it a little bit. I don't know how to share my screen, but I can pull it up.
Yeah, and if you should have a share screen button down at the bottom of your session, and if you don't, we can share it.
Yeah, so if you click on your toolbar, you should have a green arrow pointing up that says share screen below it. And then it'll pull up a menu of images and you can select the screen you want to share from there.
Okay, I see it. Let me just find where I have it. I have so many tabs. 1 second. Let's just see.
Hey, thanks for stepping up. We're putting you on the spot, you guys.
I have to click this link again, sorry.
No worries.
Go back in here. I'm just gonna share my desktop in general.
We won't judge you.
Yep. And team 3, you know what's coming next. So
how many icons on the desktop? I always clear mine off before I have to share my screen.
Okay, good job.
Okay.
There.
So we got together, we talked about it. So we thought initially, oh, this is simple, just talking, you just need one item. We know what we need. So we're not in a grievous state, but we were just looking to purchase medication. First, we thought it was kind of funny that, flea medication for an iguana, but that's okay. So we took the simple route, but then I think as we talked about it, we were kind of saying, well, there's a lot of other questions we could ask about that they could ask us, and we could that the VA agent would ask us. So we could ask, so it could go many different ways. So we just kind of went with, so, hi, I need to get flea medication for my iguana. Can you help me? We wanted the VA to confirm, sure, be polite with the user. And then we thought that the age of the iguana was important because medication, depending on age, could be different. So we had the agent ask that question and we came back with the age of 2. She confirmed the age of the iguana and asked if there was any other medication that the iguana was taking, because that is also important. User says no. We try to go with the kind of red route on this a little bit. And then great. The VA responds, great, we recommend XX brand. Would you like to order it now or find it in a local store? So, we talked about, purchasing it on the phone, collecting billing information, or maybe checking them offline and sending it to them in an email. So trying to pick the quickest way through. So we said a local store, and then we asked the VA asked for a phone number or email, the information, and we chose the text messaging, the cell phone, and then the VA detected the number that was called from. We thought that was kind of a little smart, put that in there. We confirmed that it was correct, and then the text was sent, and the agent asked if there was anything else that we needed help with, and we responded no, and they thanked us for calling. So I know we kept it a little brief, but we thought that, we started the journey on the phone. We weren't sure if, what's the capabilities of the agent as well. Do we take this offline or we go to in store? Like, what can she take, billing on the phone or whatnot? So we kind of made some decisions and came up with directing them offline at the end.
That's excellent. And to answer your question, I mean, the things that so Jeremy and I are currently working on one of these projects for one of our clients. And the question comes up all the time, right? What can the agent do, right? And Jeremy has said this several times, is that the more you understand about things like Amazon Connect, whatever the technology to build the agents, the more you understand about what it can do, the better a designer it makes you. So you can always have inherent in your head what those limits are. And when you start to craft the conversations, you can always be thinking, you know, I think this is a capability it can do. This is, you know, this will be hard for it. This will be easy. Again, it's not unlike the way we work now, right? The more we understand about whatever technology we are designing for, the better designer we'll be. We don't have to be expert technologists, but enough to understand limits and enablers. Yeah, great job. Anybody, any other questions for team 2, group 2? All right, bravo, bravo, nice job. Thank you very much. Good job. All right, last but never least, group 3.
I can talk.
Okay, Jeremy.
Let me share my screen. For some reason, it's not allowing me to share. It's showing, I get little exclamation points over all the share screens. So, not sure.
Carol, would you mind sharing your screen on his behalf? Okay.
Let me find the exercise. This is group 3. Almost there. Okay. There we go.
Cool. So we went off a little long as well. So it'll go past the page, but yeah, we assumed that the AI would understand the conversation, or the virtual agent would understand what was being said. So in this scenario, we have that user that's kind of like, you know, hello, I'm sorry, we have the machine that's introducing itself and letting them know that they've reached the Pets R Us and asking for how they can help the user. And then in this case, the user is just asking the question of whether or not the store actually sells flea or tick medication. I think for us, none of us in our group owned iguanas or even knew that an iguana could get these things. So we actually Googled really quick, and after kind of going back and forth, we realized let's stick to the conversation and just try to like knock out the objectives and just get a story in place. So in this case, the user is asking if they sell it. The agent saying, yes, we do. We do sell medication, and would you like asking for that follow-up of if the user would like help ordering it? And then in this case, we have the user agreeing, but also asking how much it is. And then since the system would recognize that there are potentially 3 brands to choose from, so to kind of lay that out for them, and then the user saying, yes, they're interested, which one is the cheapest? So then the system would spit out which the type of brand it is, and then the cost associated with it, and asking if they would like to order that particular brand. Here we have the user kind of changing the conversation and jumping into saying like, well, what's the best brand to get rid of fleas and ticks the fastest? So then here we see that the user's kind of changing that conversation to like wanting to know which one is the best brand. So the system looks at it for cost as well as for the speed of actually removing the fleas and ticks. This might have been something off of the product itself. It just kind of threw it in there like that it takes 48 hours or your money back sort of thing. Jumping back to the user, So how long does it, now they're interested in kind of quantifying like, okay, well, how long does the cheaper brand take? So then they're kind of changing the conversation to the machine taking over saying, well, it's going to take 1 week for our brand. And so then following up with that question, would you like to order this brand? So then the user says, I would like to order Super Awesome Green Pets brand. Agents agreeing, okay, kind of taking them through the steps of ordering the product. And so when the user agrees that, yes, that's the brand they want, the system confirms it and then asks them if they have if they would like to charge it to their credit card on file. And then the user agrees to yes, then confirming it in some way, confirming their address with their account. We'd probably go through much more depth with this, but we're kind of getting close on time. So kind of just having this confirmation of like, okay, then the user's wanting to find out like, or then the system's asking if they would like to pick it up or have it delivered to them. And then you can kind of see here the dialogue going to like, we have 2 stores near you. And then the user saying, I would like to pick it up at address 1. Okay, your order has been placed. Maybe we might be able to know if, since we're confirming we know who that user is, maybe they start using their name that's on file in the dialogue. It'll be available for that user. Then it informs them that it's available for pickup at that address in a time period. And then following up like, okay, is there something we can help you with? User, nope, that's all they needed. And then ending the conversation. So.
Well, that's a very smart agent.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. I mean, there's a lot of richness to the interaction and that really tells, I mean, you've all been on these systems. You've all talked to virtual agents. It's painfully apparent when one of them is really bad. And it's wonderfully apparent when one of them is really smart. When Alexa does something really cool and answers a question you had no idea you would get an answer to. So that challenge of trying to anticipate, again, all of the utterances that the user might utter and how to handle that and what all those paths are, you could start seeing how complicated and time consuming this design task could become. Any other thoughts or questions? This is really good. Jeremy, did you have any comments on any of the exercises? Because we only have about 5 minutes left. I know Holly needs to wrap up, and I just want to get through the last like 30 seconds and leave you with some takeaways and then pitch over to Holly. So
I just want to say, yeah, great job, everyone. I think we kind of all see a lot of different complexities. And I just want to reiterate kind of something we said before, you know, as designers, you know, start with the conversation, right? In the conversation, we'll always learn of what interactions we need to design for. And if we, you know, research the conversation itself, we'll understand how those interactions naturally occur, and we'll know more about how to build them in these technologies. So great job.
Yeah.
I want to, Carol, did you want to take a quick, I know it's a 3-hour conversation, but do you want to take a quick stab at the question that we had before about the different voices?
Yeah, I mean, I think we answered that, or I think Jeremy was okay with the answer, correct? Yes.
Yep, that was answered earlier.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so yeah. we covered everything we needed to cover there. And actually, Al, I think you're up if I need to display for you though, right?
1 second, I probably could say display. Carol and Jeremy, did you have anything else that you wanted to go over?
Yeah, let me just, like I said, I'm going to fly through just something real quick. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm not going to go through this, I promise. But this is what we were talking about earlier. There's an end-to-end way to actually do this work, to do conversational UX design. Again, this is the 1994 of website design. So we're still in our infancy, but we are fleshing out these end-to-end HCD agile process for how to do this work. And reiterating that we're in a really good position to lead. We know a lot of the skills, we know a lot of the methods. We have translating to do to a new domain area, but we have those inherent skills. And the technology is not there yet. So we have a great opportunity to be out front as leaders of conversational UX design before the technology gets a chance to catch up. So we've taken questions. I just wanted to thank you all and from Jeremy as well. And now, Al, you wanted to finish up? You want me to stop sharing here?
Yep, I'll start sharing.
Sorry for rushing through the last part, but we're available for any follow-on questions. You have our contact information.
I love your 1994 analogy. It makes me think of, like, you know, it's the GeoCities of GeoCities and MySpace.
MySpace, there's a good reference we could throw in there, though.
As far as where we post our events at, our most common places are LinkedIn and Meetup. You'll always find us on Meetup. You can find me on Twitter at Alexiana and Holly Schroeder on Twitter at 314UX And also you can become a member. As you guys have probably noticed, most of our events are free. We do have a few members only events. And the way you get a hold of that is to become a member. And this helps to promote us to be able to put on these events, you know, Zoom costs, .io costs, those sort of things cost. So these helps us to make our things as accessible as possible and also continue to bring you guys great content. I believe that is it. Yes, that is the end of our slide. So I will stop sharing and thank everyone for coming out. Thank you, Carol and Jeremy, for presenting to us, and we'll catch you all next time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you
Thanks
all
all.
so much. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for